Hello everybody, and greetings from the Mind Science Institute and Richard Hill here in Sydney, Australia. What's interesting, what's happening, lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff about DNA and microRNAs, and there's quite a bit of stuff about various other things, microglia in the brain. Pretty technical, but have a look at some Science Direct and Science, the AAAS, but I think that's a bit too technical for today. What I want to talk about is something that I caught my eye, which I thought was really interesting, because this thing of understanding the brain and how its connections make a difference in the way we function. And so there was an article, and it was quite interesting. It was followed up on CNN website. So CNN, I have the links down there. Elizabeth Landau did this write-up looking at some of the prehistory of stuff. Also, there's some neat little videos that you can watch that CNN have done discussions. Lovely one with Helen Fisher about the female brain and the male brain. But this talk is about connections in the brain, and particularly in relation to the nature of psychopathology, the psychopath, what is going on. Now, the discussion was prompted by a paper that's just in press at the moment, and that's in, what have we got, Biological Psychiatry. I'll read the title here. Functional Connectivity Bias in the Prefrontal Cortex of Psychopaths. And it's, let me see, Contreras Rodriguez and his team, and he comes from the Belvite University Hospital in Barcelona. But this thing, again, talking about the connections between the prefrontal cortex and in psychopaths, between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic area. So it's not that they don't know things are happening, they aren't aware of things, they're unconscious of the moral issues. They just don't get a feeling about it, they don't get a strong emotive connection to it, and it is emotional load, it is emotional drive that drives us to make decisions in various directions. That's to shift us from what's going on. So this looks at that aspect of connection between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic area. And what you might like to do is have a little look around, because one of the conditions which doesn't lead to a psychopathology, sort of these people who don't seem to have a good moral compass, but it leads to a sense of emotional, self-emotional connect, and that is alexithymia, which also has this issue of prefrontal cortex to limbic area. And I would think, in the one I talked about last week, the area of the brain, the insula, that sense of inner connection, that sense of awareness of an intuitive, of an inner sensitivity, as different from the precuneus, the posterior areas of the parietal or posterior and cingulate, that are looking at the sense of I, the I in space. So we have these different areas. And what do they do when they connect with each other, in the sense of making us an integrated and connected human being, as we talk about in interpersonal neurobiology? And what happens when they don't communicate with each other, when they have disconnections, when they have either lack of actual synaptic connections, or they have suppression of the synaptic connections, which is the GABAergic neurons, a higher percentage of GABAergic neurons, or perhaps a higher process of serotonergic stimulation of the GABAergic neurons. So there's quite a lot to look up there. This is interesting. Go have a look at the CNN article, have a look at some of their videos, go if you can into the literature and see if you can see this paper. It's a pre-press at the moment, so it should be out pretty soon. And I think you'll find it very interesting. The nature of connection between the prefrontal cortex and what is going on elsewhere. There's my phone. No, you're not having strange bells in your head, but I'm not going to answer that because you're more important. Because the last thing I want to mention before I go is what's coming up. And there's an interesting thing coming up in Sydney in Australia, and that's cognitive therapy training. Cognitive therapy, Bruce Ecker, who's one of the wonderful members of the advisory board for the neuropsychotherapist, and an all-round great guy. Really interesting therapy he's developed, and of course he's very important in the area of memory reconsolidation and memory consolidation, in the sense of resolving the associations of past traumas. So have a look at that. Now they've got a workshop going on in Sydney in, let me check the date, July 5th and 6th. I think you'll find there's some other mentions on the site, because Matthew might be going to that because he's interested in that work as well. And so check that out. They're sending out one of their wonderful guys, Niall Gogan, who's qualified in this area. But if you're not in Australia, go check out the Coherence Therapy website. Go and have a look at what Bruce is doing, and perhaps he's got some things going around near you. That's all for now. I've had my 5 minutes, and I thank you very much for listening. As always, be wonderful, be amazed, be curious, and have a good week. Bye. Hello everybody, and welcome from Richard Hill on the Mind Science Institute in Sydney, Australia. Here with, guess what, some interesting stuff. There's always interesting stuff going on. But you know when you're walking along and your trousers or your jacket swish around your body and it touches your skin, but you don't notice it. Someone comes along and touches you, or a stick touches your trousers, and that brushes up against your leg. You notice that. What's going on here? What is it that makes us aware of the difference between something we're doing and something that happens from something outside of ourselves? And you don't have to look too far. Interesting work here. Judith Ford does a lot of this work. Judith Ford, she's a professor of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California in San Francisco. And there are others, but it's a term for brain activity called corollary discharge. And what it is, it's when something happens in the sensory motor or the motor cortex, or both, and there's a discharge out through the body to let the body know, let the other parts of the brain know that the action is being taken, or the sensory perception is being felt, and that it's in relation to some sort of action that we're taking. So what it does is it's through an interneuron system, and it's also related very much to our eyes. Because I don't know whether you know this, but our eyes have a saccade. They sort of wobble a little bit. And this is partly due to the fact of it's to do with noticing things that are moving and things that aren't moving, and various sort of life-saving issues, which is another thing to do with eyes. But anyway, it's also to do with the saccade of how do we know where to look, and when we're looking, whether we're looking in the same place. When we look rapidly across from one place to another, why don't we see a blur like cameras see? It's this corollary discharge. We let other parts of the brain know that this is happening so we can allow for it. So when we move our eyes quickly from one place to another, we allow for the fact that there's going to be a blur and turn it into a not blur. When we feel the extra sense, the personal sensation that's due to our movement, our brain knows that we're moving, and so it knows through this corollary discharge, this information coming out from the motor area, from the sensory motor area into other parts of the brain. And you see this in other species as well. For example, in crickets, when they rub their legs together to make that chirping sound, well, it's very noisy. I don't know about them, but I'm standing sometimes a long way away, and there's noise of the cricket. Well, they have that noise too, and that surely would deafen them. But no, the corollary discharge lets the other parts of the brain, lets the oral parts, the listening, the hearing parts of the brain know that a chirp is coming, and it actually dampens the perception, dampens the amount of sound that comes in. Wow, really cool. So that's one to look up, corollary discharge, and particularly this bird, lovely, interesting woman, Judith Ford. So check that out. Now, let's go on now. A couple of books that have come to my attention. Now, I haven't got fancy covers. Maybe this one, just taking this lovely book here. There's the black and white off the web. William Glasser, the father of choice therapy and reality therapy, and sadly he passed away recently. And so Rob Roy has produced a biography of the man, and Zeig Tucker and Tyson, good friend Jeff Zeig, or Zeig Tucker and Tyson, sorry about that. Jeff Zeig from the Milton Erickson Foundation fame, he has his company has published this book, so check that out, and there'll be a web link. And the other thing, which is really great news, is another friend of mine, Lou Cozolino. Again, we'll just give you a little black and white. Lou Cozolino, his book, The Neuroscience of Human Relationships, which is a fabulous book brought out a few years ago, that's had a second edition. So that's come out, and he's dealing a lot more into this area of the social brain. I haven't had a chance to look at this in depth yet, because he's bringing out some good second editions. The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy was given a second edition as well, so you've got to check that out. So go and have a look at that, and Amazon's from Norton's again. the neuroscience of human relationships, Lou Cosolino. That's about it from me. Two things. This corollary discharge, this capacity and interneuron activity where the brain lets itself know what's going on so it can anticipate other parts of the sensory mechanism, what to expect and to adjust for it accordingly. How interesting. Check it out. Thanks very much. You take care of yourself, be well, be creative, and make of this world something magnificent in the next moment. I'll see you next time. Bye.